this event because, one, introducing Kelly Miller to a world. I've known about Kelly Miller since my first days at Johns Hopkins. I tell people, I'm a historian, but I'm a hospital administrator in recovery. I worked at Johns Hopkins for a number of years, and I knew nothing about the origin stories other than the things that my father had, taught me. And so, like, we get into a little bit about like what I first learned about Kelly Miller before I even met Dr. Jones, who was one of my best friends and colleagues in this, right? Next slide, please. First thing you have to know when you unpack Baltimore and the city that Kelly Miller came to is black determination that had been happening in the city and the state. The state was founded in 1633. One of the first black people who was recorded on the boat is this guy, Matthias de Sousa, right? Matthias de Sousa would serve in the legislature, in the Maryland legislature. And if you go down to Annapolis, you can actually find his statue out in front of the Annapolis State House. Many people don't know that he ever existed, right? And again, Maryland Records, he spent 4 years, he spent 4 years as an indentured servant, right? Makes money, marries a woman, goes off and does some things, come back to Maryland and become a legislator, right? And then he somehow goes broke, and then we lose track of him in 1642. But there's been self-determination for black people since the beginning. Next slide. The other thing that you have to know about Baltimore, in particular about the time period that Miller shows up. He shows up around right in here. And you can see, like, Baltimore actually has a population increase from 1728 when it's founded, right, until literally about 1958. Like when we top out of it, like, why do people come to a city like this? Opportunity. Opportunity. Click. But one of the things that William Stills said, and you guys know who William Stills is? Like for the historians, right? The handler. He said that he wrote in his book that Baltimore was one of the toughest towns. Baltimore in 1865 is, in 1865, at the beginning of the Civil War, is 91% free. Only 1% of white people own slaves in the city, right? So it's not a cottage industry, right? But yet, one of the things that's not well known about Baltimore is Baltimore was a slave shipper. I've visited Natchez, I've visited New Orleans, I've visited Montgomery, Alabama, I've visited all these ports. Baltimore shipped like somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million black people across Orleans Street, down Route 40, like down the Mississippi River to ports of origins to offload extra black people. What they found as free black people were extra black people. Next slide. Oh, yeah, you're right. One of the things that I love about studying Baltimore is this church history. And the thing that you find out, and I say 50 years of progress, like Mother Emanuel was the first black recognized church in the country, the one down in South Carolina. The Sharp Street Methodist is the second church, right? They established themselves in 1797 and began to educate, right, the slaves and former slaves, right? So I say 50 years, but like the Catholics got in the early, Mary Mother Line in 1828, and you know who brought the Catholic Church, the Black Catholic Church to Baltimore City? No. It results from black people fleeing the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution, combining together to create a church in St. Mary's, right up the street from here, right? And that becomes the oldest black Catholic church in the country. And so, and they began to formulate education. And so it's not like, yeah, by 1865, you have the Freedmen's Bureau, 1850, before we have a public school education system in Baltimore City, Baltimore has 15 black schools, right? And so he's coming to a place where education is important. You know, next slide. So by 1863, right, you know, we're getting into being a free black person, being like one of the 91% free in Baltimore is not easy. One, because you're not a citizen. You have no citizenship rights. All you have is freedom. And what that means is, it's, you know, your freedom is tenuous. You know, I went to law school to find out that there were 467 free black people in this country at the beginning of the Civil War, and what, roughly 500,000 slaves? Most of the laws are around the half million or the 467,000. It's the 467,000. They are really interested in the movement. And so, like, even though Maryland was a free state, you don't get to, you know, slaves are not really emancipated until after the war. In this, at the end of the Civil War, even after gaining freedom, things began to pick up, you know, after the Reconstruction movement. And legal and educational and economic issues become the foundation of the fight in Baltimore City. So emancipation in Baltimore in the post-year wars are not only fruitful for black people, but they're energized. Next, so let me tell you what I mean by that. Next slide. And so, in May 19th, 1870, somebody else tell me why May 19th is really an important day. May 19th, 1870. What other day, what other famous day marks the May 19th? Anybody in this room? Malcolm X's birthday. But in 1870, years before Malcolm X's birthday, long before Malcolm X's birthday, they right down by the Battle Memorial, they had the longest and largest parade in American history. And it's all black people to celebrate the passage of the 15th Amendment, right? Frederick Douglass will be the keynote speaker, right? And every newspaper showed up. Next iteration. He is recorded, his whole speech is recorded in a couple of different newspapers. And what is he asking for? What do you think he's asking for? Not only the right to vote, but what are you going to do with the right to vote? Next slide. You're going to gain independences. If you ever go to the Smithsonian down in, I love this relief. It's one of my favorite reliefs in Baltimore, because it's the architect of what the 15th Amendment meant, not only to the to the citizens of Baltimore, but Baltimore was celebrated for everybody, right? And what do they want, right? They want to be able to fight in the military. They saw the right to fight in the military as access. They want the right to assemble in fraternity. Lots of fraternities show up to these events. They want to be recognized. They want their marriages recognized. They don't want to just jump the broom. Having your marriage recognized by the state is an economic win, right? And so all of the things, and so this relief is, again, May 19th, 1870. If you go down to, again, hurry down to the Smithsonian while they right? Because this is one, like, again, if you know the story behind this relief, it tells you how powerful Baltimore was in the late 19th century. Next slide. Oh, let me show you like a little about, I'm gonna give you, so here's a map of the parade route. It starts in Fells Point. It goes all the way across, literally passes by this neighborhood, goes down to like by the stadium areas, right? Wiggles up and past Pigtown, goes all the way up to Old West Baltimore, which is not a whole lot of, lot out there at that point. And then wiggles its way back downtown to right between the courthouses. Next slide. Oh, and they're worried about, they want everybody to know about this. How much jumping? Hey, they say we got and the next slide is the last remaining picture of this parade. There are over 10,000, and this parade will become not only a symbol of American pride, it will become a record crowd for parades until the 1950s. Have you ever known about this pride, other than Mike? And I have some cheaters in the room. Okay, next slide. Again, it's the same thing. So you have this massive migration from the eastern shore of African Americans. A few black people coming from the south. Tobacco is waning, right? It's no longer the big cash crop. They are free black people. But this is at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Maryland needs labor, and so it begins to import, a lot of Eastern Europeans in 1882. A record number show up at, again, I need you to go down to the Immigration Museum down by the Domino Sugar Plant. I have a friend who runs that place. And you can kind of get to see what's coming in at that point in time. Over 10,000 people a day are coming in. Wow. Right, and they're going off to other places, but a lot of them pop up here and create community. Right? But what else did they create? Competition for work with the people who've already been here. Next slide. And so that's, I want to talk about so full disclosure, I'm faculty at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And I talk about William Welch. You guys know who William Welch is? He's a father of research medicine. You guys know who Thomas Perrin is and what connects us to? Click. William Welch is the founder of research medicine, is literally the fame for teaching everybody around it. He's German, by the way, right? But he's famed for training more researchers about his methodologies. What was his methodologies based on? I'll give you one guess. It begins with an E. Eugenics. And so, his research methods, right? And so, he's training this litany of people. Next slide. Guys know who that is? Mike, tell them who that is, Mike. That's H.L. Mencken. H.L. Mencken is writing about, you ever heard of the deplorables? Yeah, he's talking about the deplorables, and he's not just talking about black people, we're talking about white people. Right? It's all the immigrants who are coming in town, right? And so, again, they're infecting our shining new town. This is literally right after Reconstruction. Next slide. Who else is a part of this team? Booker T. Washington. Right? Booker T. Washington and William Welch were running a radio show on WBAL for years. Oh, yeah. And bifurcating the information, right? Telling black folk that they could really need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps because the public health concerns that they have were created by not the situation that they were living in or the conditions that they were living in. Who were creating their circumstances? They were. By their attitudes, their childish ways. I have a great slide that I teach at nursing school, of a 1907 report, a public health report that talks about black sexuality as though they were children. This guy right here is the in charge of the U.S. Health Service. He's the architect of the Tuskegee, the Tuskegee experiment. Next slide. Huntington Williams, you guys know who this is? Baltimore City has one of the oldest health districts in the city. Huntington Williams, right across the street from the Johns Hopkins Outpatient Center down on Caroline Street. Before they went to Tuskegee, he perfected the data collection, which artificially inflated syphilis and gonorrhea rates, right? To make it look like black people are automatically plugged into the disease, the pathology. It was not the disease, the pathology, they owned it. Okay, next slide. This is one of my favorite slides. International Commission on Eugenics Committee of the United States. So this is a combined letterhead. How many doctors do you see on there? Click the next thing. Can you make out that name? Okay, so again, this is 1882. When did Kelly Miller come to Baltimore? 84. Okay, next slide. This is the condition that he's walking into as a new graduate student. And so this is part of the science back then. Again, I don't want to make this seem like the evil that it was, because again, this was their infatuation with this science was tied to their love of plants, because that's what the eugenic philosophies come from. They're botany principles. They're not human principles, right? So they are literally using plant life to define human characteristics. Okay, next slide. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you before I jump off, and this is literally my last slide. This group is established, I think, in 1883. It's the Mutual Brotherhood of Liberty. You guys know who the Mutual Brotherhood of Liberty is? First off, like, that guy with the handlebar mustache is the pastor of the Union Baptist Church, right? All the rest of them, this guy right here is Harry Sith Cummings. Harry Sith Cummings graduated from University of Maryland Law School in 1887. And they would not have another black graduate until 1939. Right, and so all these guys are lawyers. The guy behind him is a Howard University guy because he gets booted out of the university. That's Ashley Hawkins, another Morgan student who gets booted out of the University of Maryland. Right after following him, he becomes the first black person to become a city councilman in Baltimore City. Right? I mean, so like black people, when Kelly Miller come to this town, are on the rise, they're on fire. Like, but I'm gonna leave it to Ida to tell you about the man and the city that he came to and the person that he became. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you to Joki for the vision to do this. I see where you're going now. My anal retentive self did not see it, but I see it now. And I want to thank everyone who's had a chance to come, and thank you for enduring the delay. I guess things move at a different kind of cosmic space. So I want to talk about the journey of the daysman, the life and legacy of Kelly Miller. And I want to thank Vanderlyn Hampton, who is representing Seymour Publishing Company that reprinted this book. So Vanderlyn, you can kind of wave your hand. authors as well as anybody who has something to share that might not be considered mainstream or something along those lines, but still a voice to be heard. So if we could start with the slides, I'd appreciate it. So Kelly Miller was born in 1863 and he dies in 1939. So we're going to look at Winnsboro, South Carolina, where he was born, Howard University, where he was cultivated, and then talking a little bit more in the 20th century about the Negro was scarcely ever considered. And then finally, my life as a yardstick. So we can go to the next slide. So Miller did, towards the end of his life, was approached by Knopf Publishing. You know, you need to write a biography. You need to talk about yourself. And he thought very self-effacingly, I have nothing to say. I haven't done anything profound. I've just survived as a black person in the early part of the 20th century. So, but when he realized, looking at his mother who was an enslaved person, and his father who was a freeborn person, he was one of 6 of 10 children born to that union and survived to adulthood. 5 of the children survived to adulthood. He realized that his life is a yardstick to look at the depths from which African Americans have come from to where they landed now with him. So he did his own biography, and so I used some of the subtitles of his chapters that he wrote. He passed away, of course, in 1939, but his daughter, May Miller Sullivan, who passed away in like early 2000, sought to finish it. She never finished it either. So at Moreland Spingarn Research Center are 2 drafts of unfinished biographies and autobiography of Miller. And so I, while at Moreland Spingarn at Howard University, sought to kind of contextualize his life, because he was very instrumental in founding the Moreland Spingarn Research Center. Some of you might know, but you heard of the Schomburg in New York. It's akin to the Schomburg, but in an academic setting. So he was born July 18, 1863, the same day that General Quincy Gilmore led an assault at the battery at Fort Wagner on Morris Island in South Carolina. And he talks about it, that he was basically, he had been born several months earlier, would have been born enslaved. So he was very clear that his position was always very tenuous with divine and reality that he lived. I, the 6th child, escaped the stigma of a slave birth only by the Emancipation Proclamation. The promise and prospect which lay before me in that the slave mother's crib were gloomy. So he was very clear. He had siblings who were older, who actually were enslaved. And after emancipation, returned back to the plantations where they were working or living. And so he understood the blending of birth and events in his generation really required the kind of throwing into the future a better and brighter hope. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite picture of him. He is in a homespun. And when I went to Winnsboro and met with the children, and I said, well, who made their clothes today? And they all raised, I dressed myself. I said, no, who made the clothes? He actually picked the cotton. His mother carded the cotton and dyed the cotton and physically sewed this suit together. And so, and this picture is at Emory University, which I have slight contention with about later passage. But so he understood, once again, foot both in the future and in the past. So his whole idea of the homespun suit, he says this in the 20s and the 30s, why have we let that go? We should have kept that going, because that would have been industry for our people. So this is him in his homespun suit. And I just love the fact that he looks so young and just so kind of promising there. Next slide. So a vastly different life opens for me, so 1880 to 1889. The thirst for learning and to empower the post-enslavement generation. He's that first generation who's going to be able to breathe free air and be expected to learn and be expected to become industrious and to kind of lift the race as they're doing. Woodson's going to be doing that, Bethune's going to be doing that, Nanny Helen Burroughs, that whole generation. What the investment was is a Presbyterian minister, Willard Richardson, who went to Fairfield Institute in South Carolina after the enslavement period was over. Lots of Presbyterians went south to teach the newly freed people. And it wasn't, some of it was altruistic, some of it was paternalistic, but the idea that they were called by some divine order to help these people become citizens. And also white youth went to school the same time black youth did, because they also were impoverished. So we weren't the only ones going through the doors to school. There were a lot of other people coming with us. So Willard Richardson realized he was gifted mathematically. He was called the lightning calculator. And I wish I could crunch numbers like that, but I'm not good at numbers, I do letters. So he says, picture me, nearly 14, when the great change came into my life. I had never seen a newspaper, a magazine, or heard a lecture, and never received instruction from a teacher. So it wasn't that they weren't talking or amongst themselves, but to be in a formal setting, academically, having just seen what happened from your parent, your mother who was enslaved, siblings who've gone back. There's Confederacy. South Carolina still has Confederate walls in the 21st century, so you know what it must have been like in the 19th century. And that's okay, they were allowed that space, but it was also letting you know your place. Next slide, please. So here he is now. And he comes to Hopkins, and there's a discussion in the book about Samuel Newcomb, who actually had to write a letter for him. He had to get 3 letters of recommendation before he was allowed to apply. And he worked on his degree at Hopkins for 2 years. He was going to study mathematics, physics, and astronomy at the doctoral level. He had already done his bachelor's at Howard University, and he was coming to do the doctoral level. It actually says in his memoir that he would have been valedictorian of his class of 3, but they had abolished the title. So he just had to be a graduate. But he had a lot of witty humor. And he said, I might say that I was treated with cool, calculated civility as a student at Hopkins. The fact that Professor Newcomb was personally interested in me became known throughout the institution and undoubtedly inured to my advantage. So once he had a white benefactor who said, well, this one is sufficient to be here, he was still kind of, not pariah, but just simply that person. And next slide. So eventually he has to leave by 1886, 87, because he was still sending money back home. And he actually, for graduation, he had purchased the farm his parents worked on and gave him the 10 acres of land. And then he's supporting siblings, and he's supporting nieces and nephews, and still trying to maintain a life in Washington, D.C. And you see how dressed he was. He became very fancy in his dress after he gets married in the 1890s, so to look the part of Washington, D.C. elite. And so as a result, he's going to be in a world that's going to be different. There's no support. So he has to work and strive. So he does a lot of writing, he publishes articles, and he's selling articles and books. He's a founding member of the American Negro Academy. Are people familiar with the American Negro Academy? So there were a lot of organizations, such as the Brotherhood of Liberty and others, that were started around the country where African Americans of like class or mind or religion or any other affiliation would coalesce and galvanize their strength and their beliefs. So with the American Negro Academy, Alexander Crummell, who's going to be a freeborn black man in New York, along with Paul Lawrence Dunbar and several others, are going to form this intellectual society to not just write and talk amongst themselves, but publish for both literate and those rising literate to understand who we are, historically, culturally, economically, politically, so that we're able to have an articulate conversation. Next slide. I love this picture as well. This is at Ronald Jones Research Center. And this is the Epsilon Boulay. And that's Sigma Phi Phi fraternity. Has anyone heard of Sigma Phi Phi fraternity? Okay, or the Boulay. We have here in Baltimore, Gamma Boulay. And this is a group of men that have a very fixed position in society. You see Miller in the row in the middle. There's going to be Judge Robert Terrell, who's going to be there. Behind him is Carter G. Woodson. Then there's going to be Just over there at the corner. And I think that's Frederick Douglass's son, Lewis Douglass, at the top and the back in the middle. These are men of note in industry. This organization was founded in 1904. And once again, these were men who had a far-reaching economic, social, political influence. So he's this son of slaves with these other men who might have been freeborn, totally parentage and education prior to. And of course, you know Judge Terrell's wife is Mary Church Terrell. So they're a very high class of people. So these are the men he circulated with. And these are the people he had conversation with. Next slide. At the same time he's doing that work, he's always trying to make money. So he takes poetry and he's going to write lyrics to this piece of sheet music by J.T. Layton. And I had someone actually play it for me, and I have to get his, because he actually played and sang it for me. I have it on the CD. I need to bring that in the future. But so he's using this poem to talk about the plea of the oppressed. And it kind of just repeats itself in terms of the history that African Americans have come from and the possibilities that they have in their current situation to make the future better. He always wanted to challenge the situation of the past with the hope of the future. And it was incumbent upon everybody involved in the current situation to make that future brighter. And so I love this particular piece. It's in the Jesse Moreland collection of sheet music at New Orleans Research Center. Next slide. So this is another one of my favorites. I actually had the pleasure of going to Winnsboro, South Carolina, and meeting one of the siblings' descendants, and the man walking in the room looked just like Miller here. And when I saw him, I was just like, oh my God. And he was like, oh, it's because I'm so dark. And because his cousins are very fair complected here in DC. And I was like, no, but your face. I mean, just as if he was walking now, you know. And he was going to be like, what are you talking about? I was just like, oh, because he had the same height. He didn't have the mustache, but the same complexion. And just the carriage, like if he was to be, you know, brought back. And seeing how small Booker T. Washington was beside him. And then Bert Prillerman, who was also a school founder in West Virginia, is seated. So the whole idea of coalescing as educators and such, I love Booker T. Washington as a human being or an ancestral personality, but he was very duplicitous. And there are some letters in the book where he basically would tell Miller one thing and then run another story behind his back. But Miller knew. I mean, like Baltimore, Smaltimore, Washington, D.C. has all kinds of groups. So he knew it. He's like, I'm no fool. So, I mean, you're good to do what you want to do. I'm not going to change my face, but I know what you're playing. I don't fold. I'm going to hold my cards. So, but it was very interesting, the kind of contention between the two of them. And Du Bois himself was also part of that, you know, triumvirate of men who had different opinions. But Miller did not let that get too public because we have a larger fight. And so me being petty with you is not going to solve the problem. It's going to distract from the larger issue where our people need to be as a race. So he talks about this Negro scarcely ever considered. This is World War I to the 1920s. And so when you get to World War I, they're going to come to the HBCU campuses to recruit for black men to be in service. And he's going to be helping that crusade to get these black men as officers, not just simply as fodder, but to actually be officers in the military. Next slide. So here he is in Los Angeles. So he's stumping for the capstone. He traversed the United States to raise awareness about education. He's in Gary, Indiana, Detroit, Chicago, Mississippi, Louisiana. He's across the country talking about Howard, talking about education, and talking to the alumni there, bringing people back to the actual institution to join. One of the descendants of an alumnus did send this copy to us, and I was able to use her picture because I didn't know it existed. But he's out there in World War I in Los Angeles. So that's going to be a train ride. That's not going to be a jet or a plane. Although he does talk about planes in the 30s, how loud they were, and how he kind of regretted the idea of the peacefulness of just a rabid dog or a horse. But the sound was changing in terms of his years as he got older. Next slide. So at the same time, I love this. Is a cartoon from a newspaper, and it's called the Negro Sanhedrin. So he was very given to biblical allegory. And so the Sanhedrin was a Jewish council of about 70 individuals who would sit and kind of discuss and philosophize and map out a plan for the group and bring it to the group and then implement it. So he was trying to get varying organizations. Let's not talk about our method. Let's all agree we want a solution. And now what does that solution look like? So if you want to fly, you want to drive, you want to walk, let's agree. We're all going to Texas, Dallas. However you get there, but that's where we're going. And that's what he sought to do. So you see he's standing on the Rock of Prejudice, which was the big thing. He's trying to drag the mule, which is the Sanhedrin, and then there's, quote, the Negroes. And so he's trying to, this vehicle that's trying to pull them through the muck to raise progress. And he's doing this, and they kind of said he was antiquated because he wouldn't sell out. He just believed we needed all of us to get us there. So it doesn't take the classical 10% of Du Bois or the manual arts. It's going to take all of us to get us there. And what all of us looks like needs to be all of us understanding we're going there. And he lives that truth to his death. And I think it's a very profound thing because, and we talk about it in the book towards the end, that he eventually says history will be his judge. Because he's not like Du Bois. He's not like Booker T. Washington. And he kind of just falls between the cracks, but he's finding a renaissance now in terms of what his writings were. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite picture. He reminds me of my dad. And that was kind of my affinity for him because my father loved gardening as well. And this was actually on the 4th Street in Washington, D.C., where he actually had a farm, not a farm, a plantation, a farm, basically. He raised a lot of crops. And it was the old, where the Bethune dorm is now, the old Bethune that was there, or before the Bethune house. That's where he lived at 4th Street, 2225 4th Street. Yeah. And he just says, my life is a yardstick of progress. And so he was a founding member of Alpha Phi Alpha, Beta chapter, Sergeant Jokey, not Captain. His daughter, Mabel Sullivan, was a charter of Alpha Kappa Alpha here in Baltimore City as well. And his granddaughter, Aunt Gloria, actually was a member of Delta. And his son, Isaac Newton Miller, passed away from appendicitis, and he was a member of Omega. So he lived all of that. And what he sought to do was to have a harmony of difference of opinion to get us, not just simply the race, but humanity to a place where we can go. And just before I close, there's a little vignette where he talks about when his father died and he went back home to bury him, how the Confederate veterans wanted to find a Confederate flag to drape the casket. And he's like, I hope you got to find that flag. So he couldn't find the flag, but he couldn't tell them no, because his father was impressed to service on behalf of the Confederacy, but your wife is enslaved, you have children, so you had to do what you had to do. But he was so glad, he writes about that he was glad his father's coffin was not desecrated by that flag that meant so much to other people than to those individuals who saw it as patriotism and culture. And that last slide, I think, is just saying thank you. Yeah, so that's the thank you slide. I would love for conversation. I think we're going to be in conversation, I think. So I look forward to any of your thoughts and opinions.
So now we're going to have a discussion portion. I know y'all have some questions. We have Steven, we have Dr. Jones here. And if anyone doesn't have a question, I will start with a question. We chopped it up, a couple times. And personally for me, there are like a couple things, right? The first thing is I think people probably want to know the process in which Kelly got into Hopkins and being the first Black graduate of Hopkins. And then also, Steve, and if you could also speak on like what was Hopkins at this time, right? Because it's not the Hopkins now. So I'd like to start there.
Thank you for that. I'll just say that he was a mathematician and he was an astronomer. There's actually a letter he writes to his daughter about how many steps in tracing stars because he missed a train somewhere, so he's talking about that. So he really kind of understood the multidimensional thinking process of that. So when he comes back from buying the farm for his parents in South Carolina, he really wanted to pursue a career in higher mathematics. He actually wrote a mathematical textbook, which did not survive. We have all the rejection letters from the publishers who refused to publish it, but the actual manuscript itself did not survive. And so he writes a mathematician, Simon Newcomb, for his instructions on how to pursue this. So Newcomb is actually going to be from Nova Scotia and work for the United States Navy, and having juried Miller's work, realized he had potential. And as a result, endorsed him by offering to write a letter of recommendation for him in terms of his character and his capacity. Because right around the same time that Stephen's talking about pseudoscience and eugenics, looking at his complexion and his origin, you could not have capacity to understand mathematics at that level. However, he was able to prove himself true. So he had to go to 3 individual persons to get character references and capacity references to even apply. And shout out to the Hopkins Archives, they actually have his original application in his handwriting there where they talks about, well, I think I'm good for this, and this is why I am, and these are the people that endorse me. So he had to have those kinds of letters of reference to go. And I'll turn it over to you about what Hopkins was and its origins. I did not know it was such a young university. It was founded in the 1870s, Morgan predates Hopkins in that regard. And so that's an interesting space, and if you kind of unpack what the vision of Hopkins was for itself in its infancy, that would be very helpful.
I'm not a Hopkins expert, but I know a lot about its origin stories. And one of the things that you can say about Hopkins back then is right after the Civil War, medicine is kind of like in its wild west stages, right? After every war, one of the things is if you study war, you'll see that there are always medical advancements during the war, and so medicine is really, so my focus is medical school on the downtown campus. They're looking to sprout wings. They've invited the surgeon, Halstead, who is, if you ever, he's a surgeon, but he's also, sniffs coke and heroin and like apply, so, because there are no rules. And so when I say it's the Wild Wild West, it's the Wild Wild West of advancement in education. And so like one of the things that I really want to point out is even though the school has its Quaker foundings, right, that's what literally attracts him. Like much like Hopkins is today. Hopkins is a very complicated place where everybody does not believe that he and people like W.B. Du Bois are going to succeed. And they're not on that, they're not on that, in that same framing. And so like, I was sitting over here with another Hopkins grad, and I forget the phrase that you used. Do you remember what it was? About how he felt.
Cool, calculated.
Yes. And then we said, like, I started at Hopkins as an administrator, and I was one of the first black administrators. This is the early 90s on campus. And we looked at each other, and I was like, oh yeah, we know exactly how that felt. And that was the 1990s, almost 100 years later. And so when you start talking about like what Hopkins was, it was a very complicated place, but it was growth oriented, right? It was, like I said, like the Wild Wild West of education. It was really cutting its path, and in steep competition with the Germans, right, and with some other hospital and university spaces. I mean, literally, they wanted to. By 1910, they would begin to curate modern medicine. And so like that's what Hopkins was back then. They were beginning on the forefront, like the educational guy, Flexner, was a PhD in education, who was from West Virginia. A lot of these people are Southerners. Woodrow Wilson was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins back then. What's the guy who wrote the book, The Klansman?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. He writes response to him. So Dixon.
Yeah, Dixon. Dixon, who wrote The Klansman, is a student at Johns Hopkins. And they live right up there on Utah Place. Right? And so, like, it's not ironic that the first film that is screened at the White House is Birth of a Nation. It's just not accidental. So again, these are competitive spaces. Monroe Trotter goes to Washington, D.C. What's his first name? William Monroe Trotter goes to Washington, D.C. because he knows Woodrow Wilson. He knows that this is, what do they call it? Fake news. But again, what does Woodrow Wilson call it? He calls it lightning in the bottle. Right? It's a PR campaign. And so, like, Hopkins is, like, I think, like most universities in that time and now, are not only political spaces, they're actionable spaces where the faculty and people are taking a position, and trying to lead the future.
So just to piggyback along that, when he gets put out of the school, he leaves the school, he realizes that in the humanities space, even though the eugenics and the pseudoscience is going on with the actual measurement of skulls and brains and all other kinds of gory things, there's a social element or a policy element to this. And so he becomes a fledgling father of black sociology. So when you say that you're a social worker and you're looking at the idea of how the systems are creating these situations, then he's going to start to figure out you're going to have to use science, you're going to have to use humanity, some kind of faith-based, what have you, to create an equation or a formula with which to mediate these things. Because at the end of the day, some of his writings are rather pointed because of the time in which he's writing them. That he was going to say, well, the red man and the yellow man will go away, it'll just be the black and the white left. And they're not going to be white forever because of the idea of Piaget and the whole idea of the peace. So at the end of the day, it will still be some level of discrimination, so we have to find a better way to mediate that. Because eventually we'll annihilate all of ourselves.
Right.
Because it'll be the fair complected against the fair complected. So at some point it becomes irrational. And so because he was a logical, rational being, I don't have to like you, but we have to coexist.
Right.
And what does that look like? And so I even had women with the suffrage movement who said he was a sexist, he didn't believe in women voting, and I said, that's not true, he did not say that. But so the whole idea of coexisting was very real for him. Some of his language might have been a bit harsh, but he understands sociologically there's an origin and a benefit to keeping people in a vertical relationship. The top benefits from the bottom. and the bottom feeds on itself, so then that's perfect. They're perpetually going to maintain that space. But if you actually make it more lateral or horizontal, now wait a minute, we're all equal, we can actually have capacity to move forward, then that's going to change the whole dynamic.
Yeah, it's growing the pie. He's thinking about growing the pie.
Any questions? So we're gonna go, because Kelly didn't finish from Hopkins, and he went to DC. And so, you know, we talk about Baltimore a lot because we're in Baltimore. DC is its own demon. So what I want to get into now is, because if you go to DC now, you may see Trump signs everywhere. You're gonna see the National Guard. And so now I want to get into like DC, and you know, he was in the Black Mecca, but what was the Black Mecca that also kind of predicted what the Black Mecca is now?
That's a very good point. It brings me back to Morgan State. So for those of you who are affiliated with Morgan State, Dwight Oliver Wendell Holmes, the first Black president, was a student of Miller. But he taught in the Baltimore public schools and elementary schools. So there's actually in the book, and I'll look for it, called The Oath of Afro-American Youth. And every fourth grader in the Baltimore public school system recite this every morning. And it really talks about race pride and the idea of dignity and manhood and womanhood in this lovely way. And every fourth grader recited this every morning. And so he was in that elementary school space with this guy Holmes, and Holmes taught and got a PhD in education as well. So he's in Baltimore with one toe in Baltimore, but he's in DC at Howard, but he's sending out apostles around the country who understand it's going to take a moral, educational, sound found, and then of course, I hate gym class, but the whole idea of being a sportsman and having the idea of athletics so that you can actually temper yourself emotionally and guard yourself and grow your own food. So it's a holistic way of thinking. It's not just simply being smart and you can't stay awake, or being awake but you don't know how to think. It's a holistic way of seeing yourself post-enslavement. And so joining the American Negro Academy, or starting the Negro Sanhedrin, or the whole idea of the Black Museum movement, that was his thing. Then he'd be a National Negro Museum and Library, situated at Howard, of course, the capstone, because the world needs to know who we are, and we need to know who we are, because we don't know. So the whole idea of bringing the records, the libraries, the books, the artifacts together to study ourselves and know ourselves. Alain Locke's going to Egypt in the 1920s, so he's going to have those things. You're going to have, Ernest Just. You're going to have, of course, the women as well. Ina Bell Lindsay and other individuals doing sociology and social work. We need to coalesce the brain and understand ourselves holistically. So I think Baltimore and DC are mirror reflections of each other. They're different sides of the same coin. And I think it's very interesting that I think Baltimore is more humane because it's a lot of indigenous people here, whereas DC is a lot of people come from other places. And I know there's a couple of native Washingtonians in the room. I know you're over there. I see you southeast, northeast. At any rate, and there's a culture there too that's been kind of brushed aside by the federal government. So when Miller goes and walks to Anacostia and meets Frederick Douglass and actually has a conversation with this man who went through these things, it's going to be an impactful way, which is Lucy Sloan, Baltimore native, is going to come to Howard University, part of the Du Bois Circle in Baltimore City, so she's going to founder of Alpha Kappa Alpha. So all this cross-fertilization between these ultimate Black spaces, then you can't forget Pittsburgh, you can't forget Chicago, New York, Boston. You're going to find these Black spaces really synergizing themselves. So I would definitely implore everybody, if anything you take away, call it the Black Renaissance. It's not the Harlem Renaissance, because there were multiple cradles of activity going on around the country. So you're going to have it in Pittsburgh, Chicago, Boston, Philly, and so it's not Harlem. We love Harlem, and no shade about Harlem, but it's a multiple cradle thing, and it's happening again as well. Trump's sending it where? The troops are coming here, DC, Chicago, really? New York? So what are you saying? Why are these spaces so gifted in some kind of dimension that they're threatening? If we're such a drugged out, whatever out, we should kill each other. We should all be dead, right? And that's what the statistics say. We should all be good dead, or hypertension or diabetes dead. So why are we thriving with nothing? You've taken everything away. So what was the threat? So Miller saw that as an opportunity to say, okay, we need to cultivate these spaces for those who are coming and honor those who went before. That's the long answer.
I love the fact that you brought in Washington, D.C., because I think that Washington, D.C. So two things that you should know about Baltimore and Washington, D.C. I talked about Baltimore having the largest free black population. Well, D.C. had the smartest black population and numbers. And so by, when D.C. takes off in the early 1800s, the early folks that populated who are mostly, who are black people, are usually of mixed descent, the son of white men who are, looking for anti-lynching laws. And so, like, by the time the war happens, again, the fabric of DC is beginning to change. It's very, very, very intellectual at this point in time. They create the first black high school, Dunbar. Baltimore creates the second one, right? And so there's a synergy. A lot of before Kelly Miller comes to Baltimore, a lot of those lawyers who were on that picture that I showed you, Mutual Brotherhood, they came from Howard University. The first black person to have admitted privileges at Johns Hopkins was a black woman who worked in the Phipps Clinic from Howard University. Right, I mean, so like Howard University begins, to foment, and not everybody can work at Howard University, right? And so like, what you begin to see is leveling, right? And so like if you've ever read the book First Class about Dunbar High School produced more PhDs than any other high school in the country, white or black at one point in time, right? I mean, so this synergy, like I appreciate, like you want to gift it to, I'm a homeboy. That happened in Baltimore and DC. A lot of like that energy, and then it begins to filter out into other places, other black spaces. But I think the origin stories, again, like I don't find it remarkable that people like him and Zora Neale Hurston, who is actually, his daughter is one of Zora Neale Hurston's best friends, when they're at Morgan. That's not accidental, and so like this place is a hotbed of activity, and I tend to think that black brilliance kind of comes together always to, you see this through time, and it wasn't accidental.
So I found the oath here, and it says, this is what fourth graders in 1914 recited every morning. I will never bring disgrace upon my race by any unworthy deed or dishonorable act. I will live a clean, decent, manly life and will ever respect and defend the virtue and honor of womanhood. I will uphold and obey the just laws of my country and not allow prejudice, insult, injustice, or outrage to cower my spirit or sour my soul, but will ever preserve the inner freedom of heart and conscience. I will not allow myself to be overcome with evil, but will strive to overcome evil with good. I will endeavor to develop and exert the best powers within me and for my own personal improvement, and will strive unceasingly to quicken the sense of racial duty and responsibility. I will in all these ways aim to uplift my race so that to everyone bound to it by ties of blood, it shall become a bond of ennoblement and not a byword of reproach. So then he's going to have to the same Hawkins, who was Mason Hawkins, who was a principal, write him and say, I took up the matter of your oath to the schools in Baltimore up with the superintendent a time ago. He informed me that he had the question under advisement. I might say that he expressed some doubt about the likelihood of obtaining a board sanction of his introduction, but nevertheless we'll get it done. So this is the school superintendent principal of one of the schools here. Yeah, Mason Hawkins, who is married to not Charlotte Hawkins, I'm getting my Hawkins confused, who is a member of the Du Bois Circle. So once again, you're seeing this diffusing of all of this, women in the club movement, education, the DC, Baltimore thing.
Connection.
And his wife was from Baltimore.
Of course.
Annie Mae Butler, she was a Baltimore native. I have to do more research on her, but she was a Baltimore native as well. So,
Did you know Hyman Revels?
possibly.
Okay, yeah. Because Hyman Revels taught here too.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Any questions?
Come on. Y'all skipped happy hour for this.
First of all, thank you for your presentations this evening and all the research that you have done. I'm always interested in how the researchers and the authors, what they individually took away from what they learned, how it has impacted you, or how you will move forward with what you learned about Mr. Kelly. And any of the research you've done.
Okay. No, you go.
Thank you for that question, I appreciate it. I guess research finds you. I think all of us might have a bent or an interest in something, and it finds you, whatever that interest is. So I was not intentionally looking for Kelly Miller, but I was at Moreland Spingarn Research Center during our 90th anniversary, and I'm like, well, what's the foundation of Moreland? How do we get started? And so to learn that this was his idea, that he actually asked Jesse Moreland, can you donate your collection to Howard, as a journal alum, you have no children, give it to us, let us start a foundation. And that becomes the Moreland Foundation in 1914, that goes into Moreland Spingarn in 1946, that becomes Moreland Spingarn Research Center in 1973. And I'm like, how is this man so intrinsic to this, and his name doesn't exist? There's no picture of him on the wall. You see Dorothy Porter, you see Arthur Spingarn, you see Jesse Moreland, and then there's a small 8x10 with no citation of Miller. There's no caption. You just walk by a picture of a black man in academic regalia. And I'm like, what the heck? But apparently him and Mordecai Johnson had a huge falling out, so Mordecai Johnson made it very clear. Once he's done, he's good and done. God, we're not going to ever have anything on this campus named for this man. Wow. So he made it very clear to bury that very deeply and almost just let it just rot. But his second or third great granddaughter, there's been Millers at Howard since then. But I don't think they even make a connection because their names are so much different now. And so they don't connect to the Miller ancestry. They connect to their parents or their grandparents, but not their great, what have you. So that was part of the impetus. And like I said, with the fact that he looks like my father without the handlebar mustache, the affinity his daughter May Miller Sullivan had for him, that she was an accomplished poet and playwright in her own right. But she never took any kind of glory. She would always point to him. That's my dad. This is what my dad did. And people are like, what, you've done this, you've done some amazing stuff. She's like, yeah, because that's my dad. And so people who knew her, and she passed away in her mid to late 90s, she would always talk about her father, never about herself. And I'm not as selfless. I don't talk about my dad as much, but you know, he was my cheerleader, you know. But I think that's what was, I had to tell this story of this person who did so much and didn't do it for himself. He didn't do it to kind of puff up who I am. It was for the love of the race, those who are coming, who will never meet, and those who went before, who will never know as well. So I think that kind of link in a chain, that's what it did for me. Long answer.
Well, my research, not so much about Miller. I was fascinated by Miller because because of my years at Hopkins. I was fascinated by Hopkins because my parents met there in the 50s, and my father was a biomedical photographer at Hopkins from 57 to 97. You know, at the School of Medicine. At a point in time when black people did not work at the School of Medicine unless they were pushing a patient or pushing a broom, right? I mean, and so I grew up walking through the halls of Hopkins with one part of my family, my Baltimore family. My father was from Virginia, you know, making the food and making the beds, and again, that was the expectation that, you know, that's how they would make their life, their living. But my father, you know, I went to work with him during the summers, and again, he worked with scientists. My father worked with, he was a photographer, but he worked with a lot of the physicians who, example, put the label on the pack of cigarettes, the warning label, right? He was part of that group. My father's work does not appear with his name in many medical books, but his work does. 40 years of my father's work in research, you know, as a research and photographer. And again, it's not until like maybe 30 years in that they began to credit him with his labor. I started in 91, 90. I started the year that the Johns Hopkins Outpatient Center opened. And I was literally one of the only black administrators, like people in leadership, who was African American. And like so much so, and I had hospital and university employees. There was no African American man to mentor me. There were only African American women. At first off, I found that compelling. You know, like that they would allow like women into that space. And I was like, well, what's up with the dudes? You know, my father said, oh, you're gonna see that this is kind of how it is. It's one here, one there. And so I didn't need to dig into the culture of medicine. Like literally I was an administrator of an ambulatory and an ICU, and nobody teaches you the history of what it is that you are applying the logic. And so I was running a clinic and never understood like why a large portion of the black babies died without, and there was, and usually when I would talk to scientists, the people would say, well, that's just the way that it is. That's the way that it's always been. And then like I became a systems architect, like in the hospital, and I started to kind of break down these divisions. Like outcomes were not just outcomes. Outcomes were outcomes that were divided by race, ethnicity, age, language, and gender preference. And that's the way, and I started to, look at through the lens of economies. And what we were getting, not only what we were getting, but what we were providing in those spaces. Why is there only less than 3% of black women in this country able to become a physician? Because that's baked into the cake. You don't learn how much that's baked into the cake until you go out and interrogate and investigate it. And so like for me, like watching a huge portion of my family die off in systems that I was helping to build, including like my father, true story, lived on Charleston, Saratoga Street, 2 blocks from Mercy Hospital, and got discharged on a Friday night. He died in the parking garage. He never even made it to the elevator. Here's a man who spent 40 years in healthcare, making other people better. You understand what I mean? And so for me, I had to, as literally, so my niece, who is out of USC as a scientific researcher, we're 3rd generation, you know what I mean? Like I said, my parents met in this space, and I really needed to know, I had to find myself in the space, if that makes absolutely any sense at all. Growing up in East Baltimore, having asthma, not knowing, and having blamed on, the way that I live, and not, the pathologies that were, or the human and socioecology that were evolving around me. So, finding out, literally, what the empirical was actually telling me was really important beyond kind of the systematic reports. I wanted to see what am I actually building and what am I actually making. And when I started to dig into the fabric and that, it was heartbreaking. But again, my father spent 40 years by his 40 years, he had already arrived at the place where I was. So finding what you're contributing to and how you are literally hurting your own. My father was a kind of a miserable story, but my mom went to a hospital and they gave her COVID. Yeah, while they were drawing her blood. And she died from heart disease a year and a half later. So these systems that we evolve over time, they don't go away. The effects we live with every day, we make excuses about why they exist. We're making excuses why there are no more Kelly Millers today than there have been in over 100 years. The faculty numbers or the numbers at Hopkins is still relatively low in a city that is, what, 70% African American? I mean, it's all like, yeah, I needed to interrogate that. I needed to know what that was happening.
We were sharing, it brought to light, when it comes to someone who has done so much for so much time, it made me wonder, whose lives did he touch that continued some of his work? Because, you know, we can talk, oh, from there, they mentioned this, this is the founder of this concept or whatever. With all that he did, was all that buried with him? Or are there proteges of his, students of his, works of his that have continued that we don't know that he is actually the originator of? That's just kind of hidden in plain sight.
That's a very good question. So definitely at Howard University, he gets E. Franklin Frazier as his successor. E. Franklin Frazier was a student, and he's going to get Ina Bell Lindsay, who's also a student, to come back, and she's going to be the dean of the School of Social Work at Howard University. So his deepest roots are going to be at Howard University, but then also at Morgan State, because eventually he's going to have Dwight Oliver Wendell Holmes there as the first president. Charles Wesley should have been the second black president, but he did a shell and pea game and then stayed up in Ohio. So then you get Martin Jenkins, who's going to be an acolyte of Holmes, who's an acolyte of Miller. So the whole entire educational rubric of Morgan, although it was birthed in the 1860s, really does kind of follow Miller's idea of the betterment of society for all of us, not just simply the race. So, and then of course, like you mentioned, his daughter, Mae Miller Sullivan, and the Zora Neale Hurston connection, she's going to go into the same idea of anthropology, with the idea of recovering African retentions and being proud of those retentions and not feeling less than because of them. So that's going to be from his mother. He talks about his mother and his grandmother in particular, Miller, because of the way in which they carry themselves. Even though he's like the third or fourth Kelly, because everyone was a Kelly. His great-grandfather was a Kelly, there was a Kelly. But, so he's eventually going to have that. His daughter, Mae Miller Sullivan, Ethelbert Miller, a bunch of poets and artists who really were into her, as she pointed to him, become that next generation of people. And Tommy, what is his name here? I should know his name. The gentleman that wrote the foreword here in the book, who I love, who does black male studies, and he's actually now in the UK, and he has been, Tommy Curry, has been an acolyte of Miller as well. He wrote a lovely foreword for me. I was just almost in tears the way he put it together to understand how Miller's writings and his worldview shaped and influenced him. So Tommy Curry is in the UK. He actually did take exile from America because of his studies on black manhood and black maleness, that he was under attack physically and emotionally. So he is now in the UK. And I met one of his graduate students in Berlin who was like, oh, so you're, okay, wow. So there are some C's that are still into the 21st century holding a resolute position on the value of black lives and black intellectual traditions that don't require anti-whiteness or just all male and no femaleness, but this idea that it's going to take all of us to get us there. And whoever this us is needs to kind of identify and move forward. And so that kind of is answering your question, I think. So, but I'm definitely looking for more. I think Chijoki's a new apostle as well. So.
If there are no more questions, let's give him a hand. So the next portion of the panel I call data and control. With Kelly's book, I think there were some things that hit me home. The first one was when he basically got snubbed from being able to become president at Howard University. And then also the fact that he was a mathematician. And beyond just being a mathematician, he toured DC, teaching young people all over, without even having the formal teaching format. And what's so important to me is that some of the things that Kelly talked about, that he fought against, that he was trying to address, what does that look like today? The big thing that I wanted to do was be able to take Kelly's village legacy and grapple with it in the contemporary, and say, when we go back and see a man of his stature and caliber, his intellect, speaking out about all these things, what does that look like today? What does the pedagogy of the press, right? What does that look like? And so I've been talking to Nfr Karaa and Adler Archer, but Nfr Karaa is gonna go up first. She's a Hopkins alum, and also does a lot of work in psychology and working with our young people. And I was just very fortunate to have her very, very engaged in just the galvanizing that I've been doing, and to have a Hopkins alum, speak to what are the ways we can sort of unwrap what social control kind of looks like in the contemporary, because it's different. They didn't have cell phones back in 1887, but we do now. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Nfr Karaa to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to be here. As he shared, I am a Hopkins alumni. I graduated in 1979. I was originally pre-med psych. I was originally wanted to be a psychiatrist. The first day of school in chem lab, which changed my whole focus, the instructor wrote the letters H-I on the board. How many people here, when they hear the letters H-I, think it's the word high, like hello? All of you can't be doctors. How many people, when they hear the letters H-I, thinks it's hydrogen iodide? None of you can be doctors. When he did that, like yourselves, when they said H-I, and he said hi, I was like, yeah, hi, hello. I figured he's reading this all. Hi. He said, for those of you who see it as the word hi, you're in the wrong field. You should be in humanities because you're about people. So I was kind of taken by that because I was like, well, don't doctors work with people? He says, yeah, but if you see them as human beings instead of bodies, that you've got to. So as he talked, I said, well, I wouldn't want a doctor like that anyway. I'm not a car. I got parts, but my parts, connected to emotions. I've heard something about having a soul somewhere. People define it differently, but there are other components, which is why a car, dies a different way than we do, You can fix their parts and what have you. So it made me begin, but I didn't pay any mind that first day. I figured, oh, he's delusional. Over time, though, I got to take this class called Industrial Psychology, and that was the real game changer, because it talked about, because as we know, back in the 70s, you all might be too young to know this, we didn't have cell phones in the 1970s either. And we didn't have computers were just coming out. It was kind of experimental, so we had a class. There looked nothing like this now. We had a separate room, with a huge room with these big, looked like a sci-fi, experiment. And the computers themselves actually looked like electric typewriters with the little ball, and the paper would come out with the holes on the sides. And it was, and you just kind of being introduced to it. But in the industrial psych, which is why I call this your manipulated mind, and how ignorance is not bliss. People are, oh, ignorance is bliss, you don't want to know that. No, it disempowers you. In industrial psych, it actually showed how they use, anybody here remember magazines with advertisements in it? And commercials, anybody here ever seen a commercial? Yeah, I don't know. See, because we're all kind of like within, you know, we're not like the, what is it, the Gen X, Y, and Z folks. The people of the 2000s. Everybody here born in the 1900s?
Yes, 1900s.
Yeah, I was told by, I was a school social worker for like almost close to 40 years. And then I was working with juveniles for a short period when I took a break from retirement before I was sent back. So they informed me, somebody was born in the year 2000, that up until the year 2000, you old. Because you were born in the 1900s. And he's old because he's on that borderline between 19, and I'm looking at him like, okay, if you old at 2000, where the heck does that leave me, you know? Then I talked, because I adopt all the young people there, I have like 1 million unofficially adopted nieces and nephews, so one of them was born in 97, so I asked him, I said, I was just informed that if you were born in the 1900s, you're old. He goes, yeah, but I'm young old. I was like, oh, you're young old?
Yeah.
So I'm like, so I'm still thinking, well, where the heck does that leave me? So going back to this class, when they were showing how they mentally manipulate your minds with the colors they use. Anybody remember the camel guy for cigarettes?
Yeah.
How many of them knew that there were sexual subliminals? That his face was actually that of a phallus. It was phallic. Which means that you smoke it, you were macho.
That's true.
How many people remember Virginia Slims? So if you liberated, you have your Virginia Slims. We won't talk about the cancer and how empowering is that really. How many people remember different commercial slogans? Anybody know of any? Anybody can tell me the one for Popeyes? There you go. Anybody ever hear of a Mac Attack?
Oh, yeah.
Remember that, right? Right. I'm sure everybody got their own favorites. Where's the beef? There you go.
My favorite, do you know exactly how to make an Oreo? World to do it, you unscrew it, the very best. The kiddo eat the middle of the Oreo first and leave the chocolate cookie outside for last.
Oh, yeah, right. Hit you in the head. All right. Give them. But our minds are manipulated, right? Now, notice how we remember all these things. When Ida and Stephen was going through important parts of our story and our history, how many people remembered most of that? I was embarrassed because I didn't even recognize Malcolm X's birthday, and I'm from New York. And when he was murdered, I was a little girl, and I'm usually, I know it was May something, but I know Mac Attack. I know Love That Chicken, and I'm a vegetarian, so I don't even eat it all this crap. But I still know all the songs. I bring this up because we are manipulated in plain sight. You'll notice I don't really read the slides. They just made me do the slides because people like visuals. So you can go to the next one. Because that's the other thing is, yeah, because it's,
I love that.
thank you. I did too. I said, yeah, that because it's three-dimensional.
Yes.
How many people here have ever heard of dyslexia?
Yes.
How many people have heard it's a disability? How many people believe that? Excellent, I like this crowd. The majority of our young men are dyslexic and are told that, so that makes them feel like they're not able to learn. How many?
Wasn't Westmore Westmore?
Oh yes, a lot of our geniuses, even folks that don't look like us, are dyslexic because dyslexia is actually that you learn like this, three-dimensional. Books are not our friends because it's flat. And when you're dyslexic, things have a vibration, a frequency. So when you're trying to read a flat thing with too many words, there's too much motion going on. I learned as a school social worker that I was dyslexic because when I was talking to the school psychologist, he was frustrated because he was not allowed to diagnose him with it, because then the school system would have to address it. And it's not just in New York, it's wherever we go. And because then we can't label our kids disabled. I recognize that because around that time, which is, I'm dating myself, they started putting computers into the school system. You know, sort of like late 80s, early 90s. And that's when I would type, I could see how when I type, even though I know how to spell and everything else, word check was having fun with me because I was just reversing all type of things. And then recently, everybody knows the Fonz, right? He's dyslexic. And he started giving word, since, you know, he looks like he does, everybody started paying attention. And he started talking about books like The Gift of Dyslexia and things. So, you know, I'm always trying to do self-improvement. And then I started talking to some of the young men that I work with, which I used to do in the school also. I said, did you ever, did this happen? And they were like, yeah. One of them became my little expert. He showed me which books had the dyslexic-friendly format. Less words, bigger, so they're not all over the place. And then I learned something because my sister is not. I used to hate her growing up because she'd read Little Women and all the words. I was trying to read Moby Dick, finally came out of the movie, and after I was like, no wonder I didn't like it. I learned that when she would brag about it, I'd throw it at her as a weapon, like F you and your books are not my friends, okay, they're annoying. But if they have to do books like origami or something where you're making something, or it looks like this, I'd be good. I figured, you know, if she could read all the words, obviously she could read that, she can. And that's when I realized, instead of us competing, when we collaborate. Anybody here ever hear of Willie Lynch? How many people have heard of Willie Lynch? Don't be shy. How many people have not heard of Willie Lynch? Okay, somebody who's heard of it, what is the Willie Lynch syndrome? What is his whole mantra about?
Wasn't it divide and conquer? Farrakhan addressed it at the Black Million Man March.
Right.
There was a letter of a plantation owner to basically finish my sentence, brother. You got it.
Yeah, Mr. Oreo Cookie.
No, she's doing fantastic. I mean, it's best known as the Willie Lynch letter, but it's, you know, and it's divide and conquer, she said, and, you know, and it really dives at self-hatred in some cases amongst our people.
Well,
And then it was kind of thrust upon.
well, how did he perpetuate self-hate?
Conditioning.
But what was the tactic that he used?
Well, you enlighten me.
I'd love to. Because I see it between that class and seeing how they've used media and how they're still continuing to use it. You can take even the slightest difference amongst people and exaggerate it, and then have people hate each other over it. Like back then we had colorism, you know? The high yellow people, the dark people. Then I know growing up we had the Caribbean people versus the Southern people. Then I learned as I got older, it's not even that broad. This Southern state versus that Southern state. This island versus that island. Can somebody tell me what one of the latest divide and conquer is in our community? I'll tell you. I had to work with my young people because they fell for it, their parents fell for it, the whole bit. Anybody hear about being a legal and an illegal immigrant? Anybody hear that? If you're walking down the street and you look like me, or some of you all here, can you tell by looking at us who's illegal or illegal? No? Are they really checking your credentials when you go? Or you look like you're part of that Hispanic gang because you got tattoos and stuff. So you don't look like like you're part of the British royal family. So I don't know about you. Anybody here? Well, I went through the legal thing, and they need to, so they should be getting out of here. Anybody do that? I have a lot of little kids who actually are immigrants, who were like, yeah, you gotta get them out of here. And I'd ask them, so when you look in the mirror, sweetheart, what differentiates you from an illegal? Because I'm legal. I was like, where'd you get that from? Anybody hear of TikTok? 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 Anybody hear of Instagram? So if where do they get their information from? No, we get it from Facebook. You're dating yourself. I thought so.
Facebook feeds, Instagram, and anyway.
Well, it's from the same owner, but they don't know that. You think you must be from the 1900s too. That's a sure sign. See, us 1900 people, we're on Facebook. They used to be, but all of us 1900 people crowded their styles, so they had to move on. They got others. The reason I bring this up is that we're still doing these things. And the fact that, they do things like critical thinking, critical race theory. Meanwhile, I'm like, and they taught art to when? But you see, when you've got all this to manipulate your mind, anybody here remember songs from the commercials and songs from different shows and the theme songs and sing along? Anybody remember, I'm dating myself again, but I'm proud because, I'm from the 1900s. I was there for a long part of the 1900s. I'm not a young senior. Remember the original Nas that wrote the song, I Know I Can Be What I Want to Be?
But we're part of it.
Exactly. And what happened to him? He was shelved because the industry does not like positive messages to our young people, so he was shelved. If you're not calling each other the V word and the F you and shoot 'em up bang bang and everything else, because again, it's manipulating our mind by the media and stuff. I bring these up and I invite everyone as I'm sharing these things, each one teach one, because the more that we're aware, like because of that class, which of course at Hopkins they didn't really want us there anyway. I mean, they made it very clear when I was there, when I started in '75, that the dogs on campus were more welcome than we were. And they tried every and anything. There, out of a class of about 500, there was about 12 of us, between guys and girls. But since back then they didn't have the male versus female. Everybody heard that? Women, I don't need a man. I can do it all by myself. I don't need a man. And then they wonder why they're by themselves. Well, you didn't need one, or they're castrating them, or you're trying to compete with them, because that's another divide and conquer these days. And then it's like if you say, okay, well, a traditional family looks like this. Oh, well, then you're anti-this, no. But that's another mental manipulation. They do these in subtle ways to normalize it, and it's very seductive, and they make you feel like, you can change the slide up. Hey, hi sweetness. Thank you. I don't remember the order, but yeah. Anybody heard of algorithms and things? Yeah. On the different platforms. Anybody know that there's a different algorithm for us earlier in the 1900s versus the later in the 1900s versus the earlier part of 2000 and whatever's going on now? Which is why, and they do it because they know what I'm interested in is different than what, somebody that was born in 2010 or something is interested in. Because through this class, which now it's gone from this broad industrial psychology to advertising psychology, dark psychology. If you look up these terms, they got all types of great books, and I invite you to look them up. Because again, the more you know about the different strategies, the less control they have. And right now, anybody here, I'm sure nobody here ever does that, talk about those young people and how horrible they are. They show off their underwear, they ain't doing nothing. what's wrong with them. Nobody here ever does that, right? I've run into a few that do that. I'm their worst nightmare because to me, our children are our greatest gift. They are our future. And also my question is, if these kids are so lost, so misguided, and so backwards, who lost them? Who lost them? Are they supposed to be raising themselves?
Other generation. Previous generation.
And what happened that the previous generation stopped teaching them? They're busy working? I have a question. Anybody ever hear that when you give birth, you just naturally know how to parent? Anybody ever hear that? How many people believe that? You're supposed to just know how to breastfeed, how to change a diaper, how to discipline them, how to know which cry is from which cry? No manual. Anybody know that that's actually another manipulation?
Well, the grandmothers are younger now. I can be a grandmother.
Right.
The grandmothers are the same age, I mean, they have their kids younger.
Well,
You could be a great
that also, by the way, is a myth. What actually has happened is that our extended family has broken down. Because for people, don't stay in the same village, they're on the same block, so grandma's not there to have for generations now. The other thing that we don't look at, which I learned when I was older, not as old as I am now, but because I was in the 1900s, was that anybody here have a rites of passage? Anybody knows what the rites of passage was supposed to do? Because it became very popular. I was, before I actually knew what I was supposed to be doing, teach them a little about their history, have a nice little ceremony and stuff. Back in the day, and I'm talking about back when we were back home, before we were brought here as prisoners of war. We were here before that anyway, but that was before they, started tearing down our culture and our, different ways of living. What was the rites of passage supposed to really be for originally?
I thought, because I'm a big proponent of rites of passage, I thought that it was, especially for males, my understanding, because my cousin went through one, I got to go to the ceremony, was that it was to bring you into, let's say males, into manhood, but just principles of manhood, bravery, courage, honor, respect for self, but it was also to connect you with your African lineage in various cultures. That's my experience and understanding.
Very good. That's what it is in this country. And to your point, when I was involved, that's what we did. Showed them Sankofa, told about our history and the whole bit. It wasn't until I became more geriatric, I'm still embracing my seniorhood, but that I realized, in looking back, there's a major component that's missing, which is why we have this breakdown of communication with our young people. Part of the rites of passage, originally how it was that the elder women took the girls as they were approaching puberty, because that's when they become childbearing. They taught them that, but they also taught them how to parent, how to partner, and how to be part of the community. And the same thing for the elder males with the boys. How to parent, partner, they had different roles. But all of that part is a very crucial component, don't you think? It's not part of what we do here. Because back home, by the time we did the Christian missionaries that forbid us to speak our own language, and you can't be connected to your culture, your rights, or anything if you can't speak the language anymore, that those things kind of fell by the wayside. And then they instilled these myths that, I also learned from the young people that, anybody remember growing up back in the day, at least way back in my day, parents would play with you. We would play board games, we'd learn little songs, little star, the bear went over the mountain and stuff. They take you for little walks, they play with you and play. they'd interact with you. These days, I like to write. I'm from New York, so I'm on the subway a lot. And being a social worker, I love, observing what everybody else is doing. And I'm mortified by how many folks, even to an infant, will give them a phone or a tablet to entrain them, mentally entrain them. Because there are algorithms for our infants too. And then they wonder, why is this one so fussy? Why is this one? At the last job I had, there was a woman who was supposed to be all about mental health. She had this adorable little 3-year-old. Of course, he's on a tablet. So I love kids, so I'm playing with him to see what's he playing for Miss Expert over there. He's playing a game where he's got one of them air rifles. He's 3. Blowing up everybody, and graphically in the cartoon, they're just blowing up, and they even have like cartoon blood going down the lens. Yes. And I'm looking at this mortified, because if at 3, and let's face it, she's not the only one.
Caucasian?
No. No. We don't realize how much we do that in our communities. And we're doing it at a time when, particularly in the urban areas, which is not new either. The young people think, well, in the 1900s we had a blissful time. I said, they have been saturating our urban communities with guns and drugs since the beginning of time. My mother was born and raised in Harlem, New York. One of the places that they did that. My grandmother talks about how even in the early 1900s this was happening. This is not new. But because we don't communicate with our young people, we might dictate to them at times. But when they tell me, oh, you don't understand, and I'll ask them, well, what's going on now, sweetheart? And then I smile and I said, well, were you alive back in 19-something? He goes, no. I said, so where did you get your information from? Oh, well, on Instagram. And where did they get, who's these people? And I always ask them, you need to start looking at the source of, because we don't look at the source of. Whatever it does, I remember back in my day, in the mid-1900s, when you were lecturing about something, you had to tell them, my training came from, my undergraduate was at Johns Hopkins. My social work was at Hunter College. I also learned from Dr. Clark, all type of them, Dr. Africa for Holistic, Queen of Flora, all type of people. But I can name them. I ask young people these days, well, I'm certified. I'm certified in energy health. I said, I am too. Are you doing Reiki, polarity, Primakeel? Like, where did you? Oh, I was online and took a course for, a couple of weeks. And who gave the course? Some lady. What was her training? Well, she's certified. Certified how? In energy work. And she got her training, I was going to look up, because I figured they don't always read the whole thing. Sure enough, anytime I look at people's websites, get some ideas and stuff, they just have, they're certified in this, they're trained in that, and it's like, from who? But again, we don't think about all of that. Sweetheart, whenever you want, you can change to the next page, because I don't know how to do it. The reason I bring this up is because how many of us, thank you, efficiency, teamwork, how many of us mindlessly just start strolling on their devices, looking at all type of TikToks, looking at all type of Instagrams, and next thing you know, hours have gone by and you wonder what happened. Like, right. When I was working with a lawyer briefly at court with the young people, and I'm trying to discuss them, I call them all my babies because they're all my babies. I share them with their parents and everybody else, but they're all my babies. I let them all know, I can't vouch for everybody else, but you're special to me. I don't care what you're doing, because if you ain't doing right, that just means we need to have some more conversations, because obviously there's been a breakdown somewhere. I get on other elders' nerves all the time, because when they trash my babies, I said, well, when was the time you ever said good morning to one of them? Ask them a question, like, I ask them all the time, because all of them, like, are inked up with, all these tattoos. So I always ask them, well, what does that one mean? And they always have a story, and they just, like, they go from looking all angry to, oh, man, Whenever I talk to them, they say, sure, I'm showing off my underwear, but that, I mean, if you think about, if you're honest with yourself, did your parents like whatever style we had when we were growing up? I wasn't allowed to wear the style because my mother thought they were, we had hip huggers. She goes, no, you ain't showing off your belly button. They had halters. Yeah, you can forget that. You had bell bottoms that scraped the street. But we said, well, we didn't dress like they do now. No, we dressed differently, but our parents didn't like it either. Stevie Wonder was one of my favorites from get-go. But back in the day when he still had a full head of hair, he used to have braids with the beads and stuff. My mother couldn't stand him because she felt he was dressed like a girl and that he should sue whoever was dressing him up because they were taking advantage of the fact that he was blind. And if he could see, he would be fired all those. And until he gets his act together, no, we can't listen to his music. I'm like, what does his outfit got to do? No, it's the principle of it. So that's why we weren't as bad. Ask your parents. Ask your parents. We're not as bad as these kids now. See, I have fun with them. When I was working in the school and that underwear thing started, rather than the teachers would scream, pull your pants up. I didn't do that. I would, fashion commentaries. Like one time, one of them had, for some reason, like navy royal blue with penguin pattern all up on his behind. And I asked him, I said, do the girls really like watching penguins run around the back like that? So I started thinking, do you like the penguins? No, I think that's a sissy. He's like, what you doing? One of them was leaned over a thing and he had fireman underwear on, and I was like, oh my God, I need sunglasses. He was, what are you talking about? I was like, that man is so bright, I can't even, why are you looking at my ass? I was like, I would prefer not to, but you just profiling it all. I said, help an old lady out. He was, he was looking. So then the principal was this young guy, so I got him involved. I said, you like the pattern on this, that's more regal looking. Yeah, you got the man looking. So after a while, I didn't have that problem. Anytime the principal came out, oh, here she comes, everybody pulling up. And the teachers are like, how did you do that? I said, they're teenagers. They like to be defiant. So if you scream at them, they're going to pull it down. Which they wasn't like, oh, you think it's low down. I said, but when you have a sense of humor, work with them. Because they're kids. And the bigger they are, they're still kids in a big body when they're teenagers. And they're the biggest babies. We were trying to get them to eat healthier. Because again, nowadays you got all this going on with, what you should eat and stuff. But when you engage their mind and redirect it. So I remember, I'm a vegetarian, so I eat all type of strange stuff. So one time in group, I was eating a grapefruit. Most of them didn't know what it was. They thought it was a big orange. I said, well, of course not. I said, you're not mature enough to eat a grapefruit. Because they're middle school, so they think they're macho. They said, what do you mean I'm not mature enough? I said, well, you don't do your classwork. Every time I walk in there, you embarrassing us. You can't have me for hire as your therapist and you're going out there acting a fool. That's embarrassing both of us. And you got to show in the black race we got some brains. And we both know you got some brains, and so you can't handle a grapefruit. Oh, I'm going to show you. So we decided, well, if the guys in the class for the group could do their work and everything for the week, we'd have a grapefruit party. They were like, for real? I said, yeah, I'm going to get you some designer grapefruits, Costco. So I got them, and they were like, oh, man, So then they were trying to call me for some emergency. No, we're having our grapefruit party, so that's going to have to wait. And the principal's like, a what? A grapefruit party, you got to wait. And he was like, okay. Oh man, you'd have thought they won lotto. We can't be feeding Mickey Mouse, so we have the trash in the middle because we gotta be neat about this. So now they're gonna have a contest. I'm the judge. Which one's juicier? Because we had talked about what grapefruit's like. Oh man, they were in seventh heaven. Came back and see, we did it. That's right, we did. Told the girls, see, you all ain't ready for it because you ain't mature like we are. So again, it's all in. And I share these things because we are under attack. How many, did anybody know what these signs, these symbols mean?
Yeah, hashtag man.
Right, what do they mean?
A hashtag is used to define what you want to search, like if you're on TikTok, use a hashtag for like wedding or a hashtag. It's a way to define your search.
Oh, okay.
And
That's
then the
what,
at sign is like at somebody. Like if I'm trying to find somebody.
oh, so that's what I'm doing wrong, because I see them, and sometimes I use them to be cute, like, yeah, this is at something, like in a sentence, but that's why I put
Oh,
it
I
up.
was thinking in terms of algorithm social media.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked, because I don't really know,
Okay.
so that's why I put it up there. Because you're obviously later in the 1900s than I am. So
No, I use it every day.
right, but see, I misuse them because I know that, the young people, sometimes they help me out, other times they think I'm amusing, like, and then they make up stuff. So I figured I put it up there so I can kind of be more in the know. Like they have those shorthands like SMH, and I was like, SMH, smug. And the kids laughed at me, and I laughed too, and I was like, okay. So I was on the express one time, express bus, and how many people still talk to each other instead of text each other? How many people prefer texting to talking? Don't be shy. I'm old school. I prefer talking, also because I'm very dyslexic to doing a lot of texting. Especially, you ever notice when you're texting, you're trying to write one word and AI gets off into business, and I'm like, and then I get mad because I don't like talking to nothing. And it's like, okay, I'm writing this, that's you. All of this is dumbing us down. Anybody notice that the younger the generation, the less they can't even finish a sentence? They're like, yeah, or smart. I learned smart shaking my head. I asked them, I was in the express bus, being old school, talking to another person from the mid-1900s. And we were talking, and the young person was very amused because we were talking about the SMH and the LOL and, ABC, you and me, and the whole bit. So he yells out, that means shaking my head. I was like, thank you so much. AARP will really appreciate you helping us out. So after that, I was showing up. Yeah, I'm smart. That's right. Yes.
That's called doom scrolling, where you just think, oh, I'm just going to get on here for a little while, and it's 2 hours later, and you still have.
It's called, it has a term, doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling. Thank you for that. See, that's why I have all these different, this represents all the different generations. See, I'm in the dark because I have no clue what's going on. Which is why when in places like this, I ask questions. And, and then you've got the Gen A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and, I was really shocked because I thought that my parents were the baby boomers, and I had no idea what generation I was. I was really mortified kind of when I found that, no, I'm the baby boomer. Some people call the ones in the 20s the silent generation, which see, you're showing your age, because people in the 1900s called it the silent generation. But the young XYZ, whatever they're called, they had some other term for that. They were more active or something. I was like, well, yeah, they went through the Depression and World War. I said, you're right. Of course, they didn't know all that part, because we also become the silent generation, because how many of us actually find ways to make our part of our story, not his story, like Orange Face and all of them. How many of us find ways to engage our young people so that they don't keep repeating it? I invite everybody to do that because that's another divide and conquer. They're looking at us as like the OGs. Somebody says old gangster. I said, do you have to be a gangster to be called an OG? You just got to be old. And I said that sounds kind of hip, you know. As you can see, I use a lot of humor with young people because, you know, that makes me less threatening. It's like, oh, she's harmless, you know, she talks all type of stuff. But it's a way to create a safe space. And I bring that up because just like man versus woman, elders versus young people, because historically, which is, as you said, how parenting worked, the elders would be with the young people, and the young, and when they're little, not when they're a teenager, but little, they like stories. And we would share the history of the family with us, the history of the community with them, and it would help both of us to become connected and empowering. Yes?
Well, I was raised in a generation where the grandmother was the matriarch.
Mm-hmm.
The grandmother was older. She, you know, had a garden. You know, it's just a different type of generation than they have now.
Well, part of it is because of, thank you. Part of it has to do with civilization. Because you said, like, when I was, like, back in the day, as they were showing about Dr. Kelly and stuff, we had gardens.
Yeah.
We actually made our own food.
Yeah.
And, you know, you might have a grocery store and stuff, but we weren't eating mystery stuff.
No, that was a treat. McDonald's was a treat once a month, a birthday party.
Right.
That was a treat.
Whereas now, that's the main meal. I've had young professionals, I don't know where I am, because they, you know, because I cook, like, oh, I'm a professional, so they don't even know how to cook. They don't know how to sew. You know, I'm looking like, you know, I have to send it to the cleaners just to fix a button. Exactly.
I just learned how to sew a couple months ago.
Thank you. Oh, everybody give you a
My
hand.
mother, yeah, she showed me how to sew a button.
Right,
Those components were taken out of the curriculum.
Yeah, they took the home ec out.
right. There's no home ec, there's no industrial arts. And the other reason they did that, going back to the dyslexic part, is that we were doing too well hands-on. So they had to take anything, they took music out, they took sports out, you know, budget cuts, but it was really because they knew, okay, if you give me abstract numbers, I am not going to be able to remember it. But if I'm applying it to creating music, or to build something, or to do sports, something that's part of reality, I run circles around their kids. So we can't have that. So as you said, for you, I mean, my grandmother taught me how to do a button in the hem when I was 4. That was my little side thing. I didn't get paid for it, but I felt accomplished. And, but I mean, because also young guys, you can see that the hole in the needle a lot better. You don't need a magnifying glass. You don't need all that other stuff. So for both my grandmothers, and I felt accomplished. I was their professional threader. I would thread all the different color threads and all the different needles. And then after I got finished with that, then I learned how to do the buttons and the hems. See, this is his way of telling me, okay, we gotta wrap up here. These are just some of the different ways that they manipulate our mind through social media and even old school advertisements and things. The reason I bring this up is that our brain is our most valuable asset. Where the mind goes, the body follows. Be it becoming violent, be it becoming depressed, be it whatever. A lot of the fighting that we have, if you listen to current music, is very aggressive. We also have become, and within our communities, this subgroup versus that group. And that VS in between the two sides is a Willie Lynch nightmare. So every time we look at and have a VS, I invite us all to change it to an and. And is empowering. Versus will destroy us. And as you can see, it's escalating. They've always deported us at times, but it's now become, we don't even have to hide it anymore. We've always had inferior education. I don't care if it's charter, because that's the other divide and conquer. Oh, charter school is better than public school. None of them is teaching our true story, and none of them are teaching the way our children learn. So I invite us all for this to be the beginning of a conversation. Anybody that's interested in learning more, I'm going to give you all my phone number because I talk to everybody who, just text me with your name and say, well, so I know it's not somebody scamming a geriatric person. Okay? Because if there's no name to it, you can talk to them, to face, voicemail or whatever, but you ain't talking to me. My number is 914-406-5046. Once again, it's 914-406-5046. My name is Nfr Karaa. I was given that, obviously that's not my government name, but as I learn more about our spiritual history and our culture, you then have a name developed for you that reflects what your journey and purpose is. My full name is Nfr Karaa, but people think, well, that's the short version. Nfr Karaa, Mut is the mothering energy, and as I said, at this point, even people in their 40s are my babies. Because my nephew, any age my nephew is, that's my Nfr Karaa is the enlightened spirit that brings out your inner beauty. So my role is always mothering and nurturing that in everyone. Oh, N as in Nancy, F as in Fred, R. Second part of the name, it's all my first name, but it's two parts, is capital K, A, capital R, A. As we said, each one teach one, and everyone in this room has a story, has a gift, has a skill, and when we learn to collectively work together and not allow the cognitive dissonance, the persuade, all of these things to divide us, we can become a very powerful community again. So with all this noise and nonsense out there, we're not going to fall. As Ida has shared before about Dr. Kelly and so many before us, there's been a lot of sacrifice to try to overcome them doing that. And right now they're winning because they're having us, oh, I don't need, and those, and the whole, and we need to stop pointing fingers because one of the things we learn in psychology and in the parenting classes is whenever you point your finger at somebody, your thumb is pointing back at you. Because it's not just who's out there, it's who's out there and how I choose to relate to. So I invite all of us to start doing which word instead of which word is a quiz. And instead of, thank you, you all get 100. Thank you for your time. Thank you for having me.
So next, I would like to invite Adler Archer up to the stage. Adler, he's the inaugural director of the Office of Strategy and Management at the Whiting School of Engineering for Johns Hopkins. He used to do research in aerospace for the Air Force. And very, very intelligent guy, has a whole network called Adler Archer's Laboratory of a team, a big team of different scientists across disciplines to help foster panels from planetary health all the way to AI and innovation. And so I wanted Adler to come to geek us even more and get to, more of the innovation that is happening with data, with science today. So without further ado.
So I've really enjoyed the event so far, so learning kind of so much more about Baltimore and how it grew and the focus on education and the focus on just growth, and then learning about Kelly and all the things that he's done, and then just learning about the mind and how it's kind of shaping our reality. So I was in the back so I could smell the food, and we're over on time already, so I won't take too much time, but yeah, so I went to the medical school and business school at Johns Hopkins, so I teach at both of those schools, mostly to get my money back from them. And then I also have a lab in biomedical engineering, so that's my primary role at the university. So, but my clinical training is actually in neuroscience with a focus on mindfulness, so how you apply mindfulness to address anxiety and depression and lots of other things. So on the next slide, there's I sent the PDF instead of PowerPoint, so we'll just pretend like that's moving. So I want to just take 60 seconds to do a breathing exercise. So I've already started, you started too. So the only thing you're doing now is just breathing. You don't have to know anything, but just breathe. Maybe notice if your breath is warm. Maybe it's dry. Hungry. I had coffee, so it's smelly. But all you're doing is just breathing. That's it. And maybe sensing if your pinky toe feels tight in your shoes, if you're wearing cute shoes. How many people get to the end of the day and their body is aching and they don't notice it during the day? And sometimes it's just the way that we can, oh wow, 60 seconds, that was fast. Okay, next slide please. So I'm not gonna talk about what I was told to talk about. I'm really bad about that. I spoke at the United Nations and I did the same thing, I just kind of changed it. So what I did is I looked at what other people were talking about and I kind of tried to think of something short but related. So data and control is what I was supposed to talk about. So I'll start with data. And I think about data in terms of knowledge mobilization, is I want to feel like I'm getting data and I'm doing something useful with it. So the example I give to my students is data is it's 10 degrees outside. So that's an interesting data point. Information means 10 degrees is cold. So when it's 10 degrees outside, I know it's cold. Knowledge is when it's 10 degrees outside, it's cold, so I put on a jacket. And so I think in our culture, we have a lot of data. And people have more and more data. ChatGPT gives you even more and more data. And maybe you have information from that, so people are able to say it's 10 degrees, so it's cold. But what you do with that information, how you mobilize that, the knowledge traditions that you come from, that's lacking for individuals, it's lacking for organizations, it's lacking for society in a lot of ways. So I just like to make sure that we're kind of thinking the same in terms of terminology. Next slide, please. And so then I think about all the data that I'm getting and how that affects the way that I show up in my life.